So my presentation is called Behavior as a Form of Communication. I created this PowerPoint. For those of you who haven't attended this, we do a little blurb here at the beginning. So this presentation is funded through the Mental Health Services Act, or MHSA FAST grant, in partnership with the California Department of Developmental Services. Redwood Coast Regional Center is solely responsible for the content of this presentation, and the Department of Developmental Services has not developed, reviewed, endorsed, or approved its contents. So my objectives today are to teach you on what behavior is, and when I'm talking about behavior, what does that mean? For you to be able to learn to describe why behavior happens, especially for our children. Learn how to teach replacement skills, modify the environment to decrease any challenging or distressed behaviors, and learn a little bit more about what to do and feeling confident about that when your child's having behaviors. So first we'll talk about what behavior is. If anyone did attend one earlier this year, I did one similar on functional communication training. So I apologize if this is review for anyone, but I just want to make sure everyone knows when I'm using the term behavior, what I'm meaning. So behavior by itself is anything that we say, anything we do, anything we think. So some things listed here are playing, sleeping, talking, even us breathing, having a thought or thinking is behavior. And then of course, I think sometimes in our day-to-day language, we might use behavior more as like a hard term, you know, like if your kid hit you, or if they're having some self-injury behavior, or if they're running out the door and have no safety awareness, right? We might say my child had a behavior. But I talk about behavior both in positive behavior and in more of these distress responses that we see. Why do we do what we do? In the behavioral field, they like to categorize behavior into one of 4 areas. And I'll talk about what these 4 areas are a little more. But what they're listed as is access, escape, attention, and sensory. So the first one, access, what that means is that we're wanting something from the environment, something tangible, or maybe we want control over something, right? So this would be like your child wants to watch television, you know, and so they want to watch a show, or maybe your child starts to whine if they need help finishing a project, or maybe your child starts to yell when they're told no, they can't have something like a cookie before dinner, right? That's something tangible that they want. The second function is escape. So that is pretty self-explanatory, but if we're trying to avoid something from happening or escaping it altogether. So if your child's screaming no and running away when it's time to brush teeth, it might be because they're wanting to escape the task. If a child says it's time to do homework and your child doesn't want to and rips it up, that's a pretty effective method to escaping homework task. Covering it, and I guess I should take a step back too. So behavior operates the same way no matter what the behavior is. And we all operate the same way, whether we have a developmental disability or not. And children operate the same way that adults do. So if I go outside and it's really bright and I put my sunglasses on, I've escaped that painful feeling I have in my eyes. I like to sometimes give these examples that are our day-to-day environment too, just to really help families and parents realize that everything that we do is based on what we get out of it. Another example is maybe if you tell a coworker, oh, I have to work late tonight, so I can't go out to dinner, when really you don't have to work late, you just don't want to go out to dinner, so you escaped the situation. Our third function of behavior is attention, and this can both be positive or negative attention from another person. So if your child is screaming and then you come up and you say, what's wrong? What do you need? And maybe really all they wanted was to hang out with you or for you to look at something, but they don't know how to say that yet, then that was a very effective way to get your attention with their current skill level, right? Of course, if your child asks you to tickle them and you give them tickles, you know, that's a very socially responsive reaction, and they did get a lot of attention for that. Or a child making a noise over and over until their parent yells at them to stop, and then maybe comes over and starts occupying them in a different activity. Now, maybe they were making that noise because it was a fun noise, or maybe they were making that noise because that's how they get mom's attention, and that's how they get the parent to come over and pay attention to them, right? And then our last function is sensory. This one is kind of I don't know, the most different than the rest, I guess. This type of behavior will happen because it feels good or because it lessens something from happening. And it's not based on anybody else, it's your own stuff that's happening. So like if your foot is hurting and you go to rub it and it helps the pain go away, then that would be a sensory behavior. Or if something's very loud and you cover your ears, that would be sensory. Running your fingers through your own hair. You know, I think a lot of people do different sensory things even without realizing it. They'll pick at their fingernails, bite their nails, pick their nose, you know, things like that. Some of our children that have high sensory needs too, you might see some of those more stereotypical behaviors like humming or flapping. Those could be categorized as sensory as well. And just as a little side note as well, I don't know how many parents are here with children with autism, but sometimes, you know, children have different stereotypical things that they'll do, like the humming or flapping, and it can be a way for them to self-soothe. That might be their coping skill or their calming mechanism. So it's just something to keep in mind too, that sometimes these behaviors, they may seem a little odd or a little different, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're bad, and they might be serving a very important function for them to self-regulate their own body. So it really is important that we figure out, you know, if you have a behavior that your child's engaging in that you don't like or you're worried about, it's really important to try to dig deep to figure out why it's happening before we figure out what we're going to do about it. So those 4 functions, that's what behaviorists like to do when they're thinking about behavior and how we're going to categorize it and how we're going to plan for it and how we're going to teach replacement skills, right? But there are other things that affect why we do what we do. So, you know, a few other things to consider, something called setting events, which I'll talk about, or overstimulation or understimulation. So other things in the environment, which we'll talk about as well. So setting events, those are things that might happen before a behavior, but not right before. So things like if you didn't eat breakfast and it's now almost lunchtime, if you didn't sleep well the night before because there was a dog barking outside all night, if you drank too much coffee, maybe you drank 3 cups of coffee in the morning and you only have 1. Perhaps you take a medication and you forgot to take your medication in the morning, or you're under the weather and feeling sick. These are all types of things that can affect how we're going to respond to our environment, right? So even though they're not direct triggers of behavior, they're things that can make us behave differently if we're not feeling at our best. And then other sensations as well, really thinking about our children, but with all of us have different sensations that we like and that we don't like, and everybody is unique. So, you know, sometimes when you think about sound, some people might really love going to the ocean, love the sound of it, and some people might think it is too loud, it's too overwhelming. Some people might like the smell of cheese, and other people might think it's too stinky. You know, some people might really like going to the circus and seeing all the people in their wild outfits and clowns, and some people might be very scared of clowns, right? So you kind of get my point here, that everything that we experience in the world, some of us like and some of us don't like. We're all unique. And for our children that can't communicate yet in a very effective way, that can be very hard to decipher as a parent, right? Because if you don't know why they're upset, how are you going to work on fixing it? So some things to consider, you know, with all this information I've given you so far. So some children with special needs, especially autism, but really any child with special needs or just delays in communication, they might have even more specific sensory differences than what we would call a neurotypical child. And some of you parents have probably figured out things from your child just by trial and error and astute observation. But maybe your child only likes to eat off of blue plates, or maybe there's only one specific sippy cup with one specific lid that they'll drink out of. Maybe there's only a specific type of pants that your child will wear. Maybe your child only eats food that's crunchy, or, you know, I worked with children before that will say they have a tan food diet and all the food that they eat are basically the same color. I'd like to open this up. I think we have enough parents here. Maybe a few people will chime in. You can either unmute yourself or you can type in the chat. I don't know if you have any anecdotes from your children about if they have any specific things that they like or don't like. I see someone says, my son has a rough time with transitioning into different activities or adjusting to changes in routine. Yes, definitely. It's a common one. Any other things your parents would like to share? Another parent says, my son doesn't like clothes. I understand that. Megan, my child also doesn't like clothes, especially when it's time to go to sleep. Pajamas aren't a thing in my house anymore.
I think it's an escape behavior for my son, because if you don't let him do what he wants to do, he'll take off his clothes at school. This is mainly a problem at school. And then he'll like tease the teachers and the RBT, like, haha, I put my clothes off.
And that's probably a very effective behavior, right? Because whatever they were going to do, they have to pause now if he doesn't have any clothes on.
Right. And he wanted to go outside. I came to pick him up the other day and he wanted to go outside, and I go, nope, you took your clothes off, so now we got to go home. But he's not understanding, but it seems like an escape.
Yeah. And you know, that's such an important point, Megan, because when we first are looking at a behavior and we're like, why is this kiddo taking his clothes off? You know, you might just think like, okay, well, the most obvious answer would be something's up with his clothes and they're itchy or they're soft. But when you start thinking about like, oh, well, it only happens after a demand is placed, right? Mm-hmm. And then what he gets out of it is that whatever we were going to do, we aren't able to do right now because now his clothes are off and it wouldn't be appropriate. So that is such an important point to that when you're trying to figure out why a behavior is happening, you have to think about the whole picture. What happened right before? What is the child actually getting out of this behavior? I see a few other people in chat. My son has a very difficult time trying new activities or going to new places. Mm-hmm. And then someone else said, yes, I remember my boy's thing was taking his shoes off when he was frustrated. Oh, so there's two parents here where it sounds like very similar situations. And then my son has a very hard time enjoying activities or outings. Yeah. And for some parents, that can be incredibly stressful because you might not even understand why. It might just be that it's something new, or maybe it's the different noises, or maybe it's that things are too bright, or maybe it's that they don't like being in the car when it's moving, right? So it's, if your child can't communicate what those things are, then you know, you're left playing detective. That sometimes doesn't end up being fruitful because there's so many things that could be happening. So when a human has sensitivities, it can affect their ability to think in a rational way. So going back to some of these sensations. So, you know, if I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this where you're in a situation and there's something loud that's happening nearby. It can really affect your ability to pay attention to what you're doing, right? I know I encounter this even at my office, right? So I have people around me. Maybe if there's a conversation happening outside my office door that's particularly loud, it's hard for me not to pay attention to that and do my job. Or, you know, maybe you've had a part of your body that's so itchy that you're having trouble thinking about anything else because you just need the itch to go away, and it's clouding your ability to do anything else. Or maybe you've entered somewhere, I don't know how many of you live in Clear Lake in the summer, going down Lake Shore where that smell is so bad and all you want to do is try to get away from the smell. It can really affect your ability to do anything else, right? So everyone experiences sensations differently. And again, you know, people that aren't able to say like, oh, that smells really bad, or I don't like these pants because the tag makes my back itchy, or, you know, I can't focus right now because someone's playing music down the street and I can hear it, right? If your child can't communicate any of those things, but they're bothering them, then those are certainly going to affect their ability to be calm and rational. All right, so a little bit more about why behavior occurs. So all of us, all humans, whether we're a child or an adult or someone with a disability or a speech delay or not, we all engage in behavior that's going to meet our needs and our wants easiest and quickest. And then I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard this term reinforcement, but I'll just talk about it just for the purposes of this conversation. Reinforcement is something that happens right after a behavior that's going to increase the behavior in the future. So a little more on that. If you were trying to teach a skill, let's say washing hands, and you get them to wash their hands and then you give them a lot of praise, oh, high five, now you can go watch your show. If the show is reinforcing and the praise is reinforcing to them, then in the future, they're probably going to have picked up on some of that skill of washing hands, right? But if the show wasn't actually a reinforcer or praise wasn't a reinforcer, then that behavior may not increase in the future. And there's no way to really know if something's a reinforcer until we see if the behavior increases or not. So some ways that behaviors increase. And right now I'm talking about behaviors that might be more distressed responses or behaviors that we wouldn't consider as adaptive and safe behaviors. They happen when they get their needs met, right? So when someone gets what they want out of it, it's going to be more likely that it's going to happen again. They may not get what they want every single time, but even if it happens sometimes, they might be more likely to behave that way again. One example I like to give is that if you're an adult that's ever played on a slot machine before, you know, every time you hit that slot machine button, you might not win money every single time, but maybe that 1 out of 50 times you won 20 bucks, and oh, how exciting was that you won $20, and it makes you want to go play more, right? So sometimes parents, whether they realize it or not, are kind of like slot machines, because they might not give their child what they want every single time, but maybe that 1 in 10, 1 in 20 chance, it was very effective, and maybe that was enough to make the behavior continue to happen. And that's not, I'm not saying that to say that parents are doing anything wrong. I think, you know, parents have such a challenging time when their child can't communicate their needs, right? And you respond so many different ways, just trying to help them and trying to support them. And that's just kind of the luck of the draw, is that sometimes the challenging behavior gets increased instead of the safe behavior that we want to see. So an example I have here is that if a child wants to go outside and they go to open the door, they go to the door to open it because that's how you get outside, right? The parent says, oh, you want to go outside? Okay, let's go. Now the child just learned like, oh, if I want to go outside, all I have to do is go open the door. And if your child doesn't have other ways to communicate, maybe they can't say go outside, or maybe they haven't learned a picture system or a sign to say I want to go outside yet, then that was their way of telling mom and dad I want to go outside, is going to open the door, right? And so that can lead to other things, right? Because if your child already learned like, oh, I just opened the door and that means I'm asking mom and dad to go outside, then next time maybe they open the door and, oh, there's this really cool cat outside I want to go see across the street, I'm just going to go because I've communicated that to mom and dad that I want to go outside. So it can happen very easily and very quickly, and behaviors can kind of they can escalate, you know, more and more as time goes on. Another example here, so a child's in the store with their parent and it's really loud, and there's a lot of people. The child may begin to pull items off the shelf. Maybe they're running from the cart, maybe they're not listening, maybe they're running in circles. Maybe the child even begins to scream, or just isn't responding to mom or dad anymore in the store. Now for a parent, a lot of times that's very embarrassing. It's very stressful. They can't keep track of their child, and the child might run out of the store. They don't know. Some parents may respond by picking up their child and going to the car, right? I think that's a very typical thing that I've seen a lot of parents do. And that seems like a right answer because I have to teach my child they can't act like this in the store, right? But perhaps the child was trying to tell you, it is so loud and there are so many people in the store and I can't handle it and I'm having so much trouble self-regulating and I really just want to get out of here. And then the parent has picked them up and brought them out of there. So the child has just learned, oh, if I'm trying to tell mom that I'm having a really hard time, this is what I got to do. I got to run in circles. I got to scream. I got to stop listening. So it can be very easy for a child to get their needs met. And again, this isn't like, I'm not trying to blame parents at all. I think that we all are kind of in survival mode, trying to figure out what works for our child. And all of our children are so unique and they all develop differently. And so these are just the ways that behaviors kind of snowball. Another note about behavior. So people engage in behaviors all the time without thinking about what they're doing or thinking about the behavior. So I know even as I've been talking, the way I'm saying it is almost as if children have intention. And most of the time, people don't have intention. They don't think about, if I do this, this is what's going to happen, right? Our behaviors are so quick. And a lot of times we don't think about how we're going to get our needs met and how we need to do it a certain way. That might come as you get older, but even adults can act impulsively. Children, as they're developing, impulsive behaviors are going to happen no matter what child you have. And we continue to build impulse control our entire life. Many children that have special needs or communication differences, they may lack impulse control or have even more difficulty with impulse control than some of their other peers that don't have specific needs. This is so important to think about, when you're a parent and thinking about your own mental health and your child's mental health, right? You don't want to assume that your child is trying to be bad or trying to do something that is dangerous, because that can lead to a whole other can of worms. Really, they're just trying to figure out, this is how I get my needs met, right? So let's talk about what we can do as a parent. There's 3 different things that I think might be helpful for you guys. And specifically, I'm thinking about some of our more dangerous behaviors or really distressing behaviors. So if you have a child that has a really hard, excessive tantrum often, right? Or if your child is excessively aggressive, if your child has self-injury, maybe they run out the door all the time. These are the types of behaviors I'm thinking about. So 1, we want to teach appropriate behaviors that meet the same need. 2, we want to acknowledge and validate their emotions. And 3, we want to think about how we can modify the environment to make it less stressful for them. So the first one, teaching replacement behaviors. So in order to teach your child something and try to decrease the behavior, you first have to know why it's happening. So kind of what we were talking about, Megan, I'm going to use your child as an example, if that's okay. You said that, your son will take his clothes off when it's time to do something he doesn't want to do at school, right? And that you think it's for escape, which sounds like a very plausible scenario there based on what you told me. So our immediate thing we would want to teach is a different way for him to request to escape that situation, right? So it might be teaching him no, might be teaching him to say, not right now. It might be, and I don't know his skill level. Maybe if he can't speak yet, it might be putting his hand up, or it might be touching a card that says no. The most important thing is that you want to teach something that's going to be easier than the current behavior. So what's easier that he could do than taking all of his clothes off? Is he verbal at all?
He is verbal, like he'll say no, but he is nonverbal, but he'll say no. And he'll say other words. He's a Gestalt language learner, so he's learning in chunks, which we just realized because we're working with a speech therapist through RL therapies.
Mhm.
So we just realized that. So he does say no, but I think that his no isn't getting across
Mhm.
to people. So like they're not listening to him. Or it's like a cleanup time. Lincoln, it's time to clean up. No, 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 no. And then he'll start taking off his clothes.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what happens. Or
Okay.
Lincoln, hey, let's go and do this. No, no. And he'll
Yeah.
start taking everything off.
Yeah.
Hey, buddy.
Thank you for giving some more of that information, and thank you for letting me use your son as a example for this presentation, Megan.
Yeah.
So it sounds like sometimes he says no, so that's a good step. You know, that's when you're thinking about a replacement behavior, you usually want to try to pick something that your child can already do, because teaching your child to do something that they can't do also takes time, right? And if you're trying to teach them this thing to do is way easier than whatever else you're doing, right? Then you want it to be easier for them. And if they're learning a new skill, that's not going to be easier for them. So if he says no sometimes, but maybe not consistently, or maybe he doesn't always echo no, maybe you also have a card that says no, and maybe he can tap it, or he can say no, and your teachers or RBTs or parents or whoever else is with him all has learned, like, okay, he's trying to escape this task right now, we're going to honor no. Now that's not end all be all goal. You know, of course we want to teach him eventually, yes, we need to clean up when we're done with an activity. But if him taking all of his clothes off is severely impacting his ability to engage in his environment and his education, then maybe that is where we start, where we just respect no, right?
Well, the teacher doesn't want, if the RBT blocks him from taking off his clothes, then she doesn't want all the other 3 and 4-year-olds to see his behaviors, and he gets kind of mean.
Yeah.
He gets really mean and bites and pulls hair and throws whatever's in reach. So it's kind of hard to teach him to keep his clothes on at school when the RBTs are not able to keep on him to decrease the behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
So to me, it sounds like it would be it would behoove him and the environment if we just accepted no. And again, that's not the end all be all. We're not teaching him how to clean up after he's done, but we are teaching him, oh, we don't take our clothes off if we need no, we just say no. And then we can work on building that later, right? Of course, there would be skills that could be worked on later where it's like, okay, we can follow first then instructions. First we clean up, then we get to do the next activity, or things like that. But for the purposes of just this conversation, that's kind of what we're looking at, right? So if escape is the need, then we want to give your child another way to say that, or indicate that to you. Some other examples I have here. So if your child throws a tantrum every time you have to transition out of bath, you can start with teaching them to request for more time. Now, of course, that won't work every time because eventually they have to get out of the bathtub or they shrivel up like a raisin. But maybe we practice 10 times of them saying, I want more time. And then that can get very effective for them. Maybe they might say they want more TV, or maybe they want more time with sister, or they want more time on the tablet, or whatever. And at least they're able to communicate something to you where maybe they weren't before. If your child runs out of the store every time you're shopping and you've determined that it's because they don't want to be in the store, then maybe we teach them or accept for them to request to leave. And maybe that's just saying leave. Maybe that's pointing to the door if they can't talk. Maybe maybe you could have a card that has a picture of your car on it and they could touch the car when they're ready to go. And yeah, that's not going to be very easy as a parent if you need to be in the store and you need to get the groceries and they're in there. But there's ways to teach this if you think about the situation more. And again, teaching that replacement behavior is not the end all be all, but is teaching your child, I can communicate in other ways, whether that's vocals, or if your child doesn't speak, maybe it is pictures, maybe it is signs, maybe it is just gestures and pointing. Really, the point I'm making here is that all of these examples are to teach a replacement skill that meets the exact same need. Because really, we just want to work on decreasing those behaviors that are causing them stress and causing you stress. You can teach vocals, signs, pictures, gestures. There's lots of different ways depending on what your child's skill level is. So how you can teach these, if your child can imitate vocals, then that's great. You know, that's easy. You say the word, then they imitate the word. Great, they've gotten it, done deal. Now, if your child doesn't imitate vocals, which lots of our children with speech delays don't, you could either pick sign language or you can use pictures. If you have a speech therapist or even a behavioral agency, you might already have been explored these options a little bit, or if your child is school age, they might have worked with those a little bit with your child already. If you're thinking sign language, there are some different websites that you can go to. I did add one here, handspeak.com. It has a dictionary, so you can type in pretty much any word and get it. If your child's very young too, you can just type in baby sign language into Google and find some signs there. Also, just a side note, we do have our deaf and hard of hearing specialist that will be doing a parent academy in a few months that will be teaching more on sign language if you guys are interested in learning more. Or with visuals, you know, you can print pictures. Sometimes you can even find pictures. You know, I think I've seen people use pictures before by finding things at the dollar store that they can print out of or cut out of books and stuff if you don't have access to a printer. Or of course, you can be working with one of your professionals as well, like a school, speech therapist, behaviorist, those types of things. If you're going to be working on pictures or sign, you might have to do some hand over hand prompting. So that's something to think about. For example, if you're trying to teach your child to say more, which is this, it may start where you have your hands over your child's hands and you're modeling more. If they imitate you, that's, you know, convenient because you can do the sign and then they will model it back. But a lot of our children aren't there yet. And then just a reminder too, that if your child is having some speech delays and you're worried about using sign language or PECs, you know, pictures, because you don't want to limit their ability to vocalize, because maybe they will in the future, put that worry to side. There's no research that shows that using pictures or signs will decrease a child's ability to vocalize in the future. And sometimes it has even shown to increase their vocals in the future. So this is just other tools for them. Now, next on the list is acknowledging and validating emotions. So this is more about our mental health of our children, right? So all children, you know, they have time to learn emotions and learning their own emotions, learning emotions in other people. And they have a very, very quickly developing brain. Sometimes our children's behavior is very confusing, or it might seem irrational too. Why is this kid crying? He just got a cookie. You know, he doesn't need another cookie. He's crying because he can't have a cookie. It sounds ridiculous for, you know, adults, right? So sometimes we know and sometimes we don't know. If you're confused and really don't know why your child is upset, you can still label what you're seeing and let them know that you're there. I think parents can get really stressed and overwhelmed and feel like they're not doing a good job, you know, if they can't meet their child's needs. And so I know how frustrating and stressful that is when you feel like you don't know how to help, right? And so one of the best things that you can do is say, like, I see that you're really upset. I'm really sorry. I don't know why. I'm here and I'm trying. If you do know why they're upset, and maybe you have that thought cross through your brain that they're overreacting or they're being irrational, I do suggest that you try to shift your perspective a little bit. So for children, they don't feel like it's irrational, and you know, they might have they might think this is the most rational thing that that I'm not getting my needs met, even if it seems silly. Emotions are very hard for people, and especially for children that are learning new emotions. It can be very confusing for them as well. So it's not only confusing to parents, it's confusing for the children. Children, the best way that they learn to regulate their own emotions is by watching other people regulate their own emotions. And I realize that's a lot easier said than done. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I think that parents watching their child have a significant emotional reaction to something is really hard. And it's really hard for us as parents to regulate our own emotions consistently. And for most adults, it's hard, whether you're a parent or not, it's hard to regulate your emotions consistently. Maybe you learn to do it in certain environments, and then maybe once you get home, you complain to your spouse or your friend on the phone or your mom about how hard it is, and you vent, right? So we might learn, okay, I got to stay regulated in this environment, but here I can kind of let loose. So we all kind of have we learn our times where it's okay to be dysregulated. For parents, they can become incredibly dysregulated when their child is dysregulated, especially if they don't know why their child is upset. It can be really hard to stay calm. So just something that I think has helped me as a parent, and advice that I've given to other parents, is that when you see your child upset and having an emotional response, that doesn't mean that they're upset with you. It doesn't mean that you have to take on that emotion, right? Your child is having an experience that's individual to them. And your job is to be there and help them through the experience, right? And maybe that is holding your ground and saying no about something that wasn't available, or maybe that's comforting them if they're having a really hard time accepting something or understanding something. I know that when I talk to parents a lot, that have a lot of, their child has a lot of distress responses, sometimes I'll hear them say things like, well, I just wish that they would be happy. I just wish that they could be happy. Every human will feel every emotion on the spectrum at some point in their lives. Emotions are inevitable. And our jobs as humans are not to be happy all the time. I think especially in our society here in America, I think that is kind of what we're expected. We're expected to be joyous and happy and excited and everything. But it's okay to feel all those other emotions. It's okay to be angry about things. It's okay to be sad about things. It's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to be embarrassed. And our job as parents is to model this, to model being a leader, and regulating these emotions, and to walk with our children as they're having this experience instead of fighting them through it, right? So teaching them, like, I see that you're really sad right now. I understand that was really hard for you. Let's see what we can come up with together. Now, this will change from child to child because some of your children might be very young, or maybe their ability to understand words isn't very high. So you may have to modify how you talk to them. But even the way that you use the tone of your voice, or even the way that you hold your body, can really make or break a situation. So think about a time that your child had a severe emotional reaction to something, maybe a large tantrum, maybe they were aggressively hitting you, something like that. I don't know what all of you parents have tried in the past, but the recommendation here is to label what you're seeing. I see you're upset. I see you're having a hard time. I see that you're crying. I see this is really hard for you. Something along those lines, right? So just bringing attention to what the behavior is, not in an accusatory way, and in a compassionate way. I see this is really hard for you. Of course, block is needed to keep your child safe. So if your child's starting to hit their head on something sharp, then yes, block them so that they don't, hit their head. And honestly, sometimes if they're that escalated, they're not going to hear anything that you're saying. Just being there, calm, and blocking is needed might be what you have to do until they've come to a smaller state. If you know any coping skills that suits your child, then you can help them engage in them. I know that this is something that's very difficult for a lot of parents. Is I'll say, okay, well, let's come up with a coping skill chart. What does your child do to calm down? And my parents will say, well, I don't know. Nothing calms them down, right? And so that's a very common thing. So that's something that you will learn throughout your child's journey, is what calms them down. Maybe it's arm rubs, maybe it's a hug, maybe it's squeezing a tight pillow, maybe it's them walking alone in a room and screaming it out. Everybody has different calming skills and things that they do anyways. When your child is highly escalated, this is not a teaching opportunity. This is not a time for you to teach them how to request for break, how to say no, how to accept no, those types of things. It's an opportunity to connect with your child and to help de-escalate, right? So you teach the replacement behaviors when they're already calm. You work on de-escalating and connecting with them when they're upset. This is a little visual I found with a lot of different coping skills. I think one thing that I like on here is that they have someone's on here like cry. You know, I think sometimes we think about if they're crying, then they're sad and they need to stop crying about something. But honestly, that is a way that our bodies regulate, is by crying. And I think that most adults will probably say that there's been times where they've had to cry and then they felt better. And maybe it's been a really, significant, sad situation, but it is something. And then of course, kicking a ball, climbing a tree. Some of these might not be options when your child is highly escalated. But things like squeezing something, a hug or deep pressure, some of our children like, or sometimes they like a heavy blanket, or jumping, listening to music. So that's something on your forever to-do list as a parent, is to be always thinking about what are really the things that calm my child down when they're having a hard time. If they're too escalated, a lot of these coping skills won't work. But if they're just starting to escalate, you might be able to get them to de-escalate with one of these as well. So it's just something to keep in mind, that if someone's too far gone, it doesn't really matter what you offer, it's not going to work. And for a lot of our kiddos, they do go from 0 to 60 in a matter of seconds. And so it can be hard to catch that interim until they learn more language. I know we're getting close to time, so I'm just going to skip through these slides. I know I saw one parent type something in here, and I do see it, and I will get to it. I didn't forget about you. But I want to talk about the environment. So, thinking about what's in your child's world, it can be a very stressful place. For children with special needs, it can be even more scary or uncomfortable if they don't know what to expect, or if it's new things that are happening. So here's some things to consider. And this is not an exhaustive list, but these are just some examples I came up with. So if your child gets stressed in really loud environments, if you've noticed that's a trigger, maybe you try to find noise canceling headphones for them, or earmuffs or earplugs. Maybe they can listen to music. Basically any way to try to stifle that sensation a little. If your child gets overstimulated when the house smells like the food you're cooking for dinner, maybe, then maybe you could have some sort of plug-in scent close to where they like to be. Maybe they could keep something in their pocket that's like dried lavender, or something that smells like vanilla, or some other smell that they do enjoy, and you could show them that they can smell that if they're having a tough time. If your child's becoming dysregulated quickly when they're outside and you don't know why, there's lots of things that are outside. Maybe it's the dog barking, maybe it's the temperature, maybe it's too bright, maybe it's that they don't like wearing shoes and they don't have to wear shoes when they're inside. So there's a lot of investigation work, but it's just something to try to start paying attention to. What could it be? What sensation could be dysregulating them? Is it the sight? Is it the sound? Is it the smell? Is it their touch, their feel, something about their clothing? If you guys have other, things like that too, where you have a child that they have a dysregulated response and you're not sure why, we could try to unpack that a little in our Q&A. If your child is having trouble doing an activity that's not part of their regular routine, keep the routine when you can, and try to front load your child or let them know if there's going to be a change. I know that's not always possible, but when you do know there's going to be a change, try to let them know. And depending on your child's ability to understand language, that might look different. So maybe instead of telling them, maybe there's a way to show it in pictures. So maybe you have a doctor's appointment in a few days and they don't usually see the doctor. Maybe you find a little picture of a doctor And you show them like, school, doctor, home, something like that, so they can see that that change is coming and start planning for it. That brings me to the end of my presentation.